All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsor, our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Tammuz, Rabbi Naftali Tilson of Telmond, for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in commemoration of the yahrzeit of his dear parents, Rabbi Yona ben Avraham Leyb and Rivka bas Ya'akov, as well as in the schos that our entire Shem Eretz Hashem should be zocha to continue to learn and Eretz Hashem finish Shas Bekarov. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Binyamin Ilana Levin, in honor of the birth of a granddaughter, Liora Sarah Levin. Eretz Hashem she should be zocha to grow to an incredible Bas Yisrael Mea ve'esim shanim tovos. And we dedicate our learning in the schos of Refuah Shlema for Zechariah Dov ben Peril Shira. He should have a complete refuah together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. And with that, let us begin. An incredible daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Mem Daled 44. We are picking up in Eretz Hashem at the Mishnah on Mem Gimel Amud Beis 43b. The Mishnah says as follows: Hamocher Avdo La'ovdei Kochavim. If a person sells his Eved Kinani to Ovdei Kochavim, to a non-Jew, or l'chutz la'aretz, or for that matter, again, he sells his Eved Kinani to chutz la'aretz, to diaspora, yatsa ben chorin. The Eved automatically goes free. Eved automatically goes free. Now, what's the pshat with this? Take a look at Rashi. Yatsa l'cherus, in Baruch Mino Oved Kochavim. So possibility number one is that, according to Rashi, is, let's say again, I have an Eved Kinani, I go ahead and I sell him to an Oved Kochavim, or I sell him to a chutz la'aretz, and the Eved subsequently runs away. So halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah says, the Eved does not come back to me, his original master, rather the Eved is automatically emancipated. The other possibility, Rashi says, shekansua bezin lefdoso, or what the Mishnah means to say is, if I go ahead, there is a rabbinic prohibition to sell my Eved Kinani to either a Gentile master, or to sell him to chutz la'aretz. And if I do either of those two things, I have an obligation to redeem him from that new master. Not only do I have an obligation to redeem him, but what? When I redeem him, I have to emancipate him. When I redeem him, he automatically goes free. Now, what's the pshat with this? This obviously is a rabbinic penalty, Rashi says. Hoil v'ifkul min ha-mitzvos. Because at the end of the day, by selling him to chutz la'aretz or by selling him to a Gentile master, I have removed the Eved from the performance of mitzvos. This is incredible. So we'll say, what's the pshat? So obviously, if I give him over to a Gentile master, his ability to go ahead and perform mitzvos has obviously become significantly curtailed. And he says furthermore, so ultimately, we'll say furthermore, even just the removal from Eretz Yisrael to chutz la'aretz, right, moving the slave from Eretz Yisrael to diaspora, ultimately removes him from mitzvos as well. Now, that could be understood on two different levels. That could be understood on a simple level, that remember in Eretz Yisrael you have certain mitzvos which are dependent on the land, which cannot be performed outside of chutz la'aretz, outside of Eretz Yisrael. Furthermore, the other possibility is, remember, there is a school of thought that says in general, the obligation to perform mitzvos only applies within Eretz Yisrael. Mitzvos that we do outside of Eretz Yisrael are simply training for when we are in Eretz Yisrael. Either way, by selling the slave from Eretz Yisrael to chutz la'aretz, I have in some way diminished his mitzvah performance capacity. So therefore, that's the common denominator over here. Fascinatingly enough, by selling my slave either to a Gentile master or to chutz la'aretz, I have diminished his ability to properly perform mitzvos. Therefore, there's a rabbinic penalty that I'm obligated to go ahead and redeem him. That's part of the penalty number one. And penalty number two, or second part of that penalty is, I would have thought after I redeem him, okay, so now what? He's mine again. Yeah. No, he's not mine. Ultimately, again, I have an obligation to redeem him, but now he goes free. Incredible. Says the Gemara. If one sells his Eved Kinani to an Oved Kochavim, the Eved goes free. B'tzarach get shichra me'rabba rishon. But there is still a get shichra, a document of emancipation is required from the original owner. When is that so? Shelo kasav alav ono. I will say, when do you need to get shichra? When is that required? when a shtar ono wasn't written. But if the master wrote an ono, then ultimately, again, that represents the document of emancipation. I says, my ono, what's an ono? On Rav Sheshas, the kasav lehachi, lechishiti barach mimenu, igli esek bach. So we'll say, for example, so now this is a very important halacha. So the Gemara is introducing me to is this idea that step one is I violated a rabbinic prohibition and I sold my Eved Kenani either to a Gentile or to Chutz La'aretz. That's the prohibition, right? The penalty is I have an obligation to redeem him. Now the Gemara says, by the way, when you redeem him, you have to give him a get shechrer. To which Rav Sheshas qualifies this and says that's only so if you didn't write a shtar ono. What's a shtar ono? If I went ahead and I sold my Eved, and I said to the Eved, listen, you are sold to the Gentile master, to Chutz La'aretz, and if you run away, don't come back to me. Don't come back to me. They'll say that is effectively a shtar shechrer. Right? That is effectively a document of emancipation. So in that kind of case, if I wrote the ono after I redeem him as a result of my rabbinic obligation, I don't have to write another get shechra for him. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Tanabanon, lava alav mina oved kochavim. If ultimately one went ahead, so I'll say, so the case over here is, I own an Eved Kenani, I collateralized him, so I used him as collateral for a loan, for an Oved Kochavim. So I'll say, so I borrowed money from Joe, the Oved Kochavim, and now what happens is I secured the debt with my Eved Kenani. Okay, so I'll say, now watch this. Kevan Shas Oved Kochavim nimuso, yatsa lecherus. Once the Oved Kochavim does his nimuso on the Eved goes free. I asks the Gemara, my nimuso, what does that mean? Amrafun Bar Yehuda, nashki. What does it means the nashki? What's the nashki? Look at Rashi. So it's about 3 lines up from before the lines get wide. Nashki, chosein, the simen avdos shetolin lo avadim b'tzavarim. So I'll say, so apparently it was common that if you had an Eved, what you would do is you would like hang something around their neck. Right? So a nashki means like a necklace or like a seal that they would wear, indicating that they were owned by a particular master. So here's what's interesting. In this case over here, all I've done is I've collateralized my Eved. I have not sold him, I've simply pledged him as collateral. Even that collateralization, once the Oved Kochavim, so to speak, hangs his sign, right, which represents some level of ownership around the neck of the Eved goes free. Says the Gemara, Masir Rav Sheshas, 1 second, Harisim v'achachiros v'arise bate avos. So we'll say, so Aris is a sharecropper. Chachiros, literally again, we'll say, are renters. Now remember, Rashi points out over here, these were different types of agricultural arrangements. Rashi says, an Aris is someone who worked the land and gave a percentage of the crop ultimately to the owner. Chachirus is a type of rental agreement, Rashi explains, where there's a fixed amount of rent per year. Arise bati avos were inherited sharecropping agreements, and Oved Kochavim shamashkan sadeo li Yisrael. And Oved Kochavim, ultimately again, who pledged his field to a Jew, in other words, as collateral, afa pisha asolo nimuso, even though again the Jew put his nimuso on it, Petura min ha-ma'aser. I will say these are all examples of land in Eretz Yisrael that would not be subject to ma'aser. I will say, just again, we're not going to delve into this too much, but just keep this in mind. There is a fascinating machlokes. We actually touched on this, I think, last week, about whether or not Gentile ownership of land in Eretz Yisrael removes the sanctity of the land. Remember again, why is that an important discussion? Whether or not the agriculture will be subject to Trumas and Maisrus. So here what the Gemara is saying is, essentially, you have Gentile-owned land in which you have a Jewish sharecropper or a Jewish renter, or for that matter, again, it's Jewishly held collateral. In all of these cases, Afa Pisha Asaloni Muso, that's the part we're after over here. Even though, right, the Jew put his nimuso on it, Petura min ha-ma'aser. The land is still subject to ma'aser. So I'll say, what do you see from here? So the Gemara says, nashki, sadavas nashki. And I will say, if you say nimuso represents something you wear around the neck, so I don't think, can you put something around the neck of the land? It doesn't make any sense. Ela amar Rav Sheshes zman. Rather, Rav Sheshes says, I will say, what does it mean? It means zman. I will say, what does it mean, zman? That halacha l'maisa nimuso means, even though there is a date upon which that collateralized land becomes the property of the Jew, nevertheless, the land will not be subject to the obligations of Trumas and Maisrus. To which the Gemara says, Kasha zman azman. Lo kasha, hadimati zmanei, hadalo mati zmanei. To which the Gemara says, if that's the case, halacha l'maisa, there's going to be a contradiction between zman and zman, because it's said by the Eved, once the Oved Kochavim puts his nimuso, which sounds like zman, that time that he could collect the collateral, around the neck of the Eved, so to speak, it becomes the property of the Oved Kochavim, yet by land, it doesn't become the property of the Jew. To which the Gemara says, it's not a contradiction. When the actual date for collection of collateral comes, then collateral becomes property of the call it the lender, right? The lender, so to speak. And then again, if it's an Eved, ultimately again it becomes property of the Gentile, and if it's the land, it becomes property of the Jew. Ela gabe Eved. So I don't understand. If you have a situation, I will say, of an Eved owned by a Jew that was collateralized for a debt for a non-Jew, and now the Jew defaults on the debt, and the time for the collection of the Eved comes about. So does anyone need to say that now this is an Eved owned by a non-Jew, and the knas, the penalty, as espoused in the Mishnah, kicks in? That's obvious. To which the Gemara says, Ella, Rabbi Eved don't understand. Rather, we'll see, you have to talk about both cases where the particular date did not yet come. V'lo kasha, halagufa, halapera. Both are talking about two different cases. One is talking about actual physical ownership, and one is talking about actual, again, ownership of the peros. V'bay sema. The other passage was at top of Memdalid. V'bay sema. B'shalava almanas lamashkino, v'lo mashkino. But the other possibility is that we could be talking about a case where halacha l'maisa, the loan took place with the condition to receive collateral, but the collateral itself never actually materialized. So we'll say, without getting lost in some of the details over here, just understand what it is that we're emerging from. And what we're going to do is, we're going to do the Rambam in one fell swoop when we get to the end of this sugya, because the Rambam groups all of these particular halachas together. What we need to take from this right now is, number one, we have our rabbinic penalty. Right? What's our rabbinic penalty? Ultimately, you go ahead and you sell your slave, your Eved Kinani, to either a Gentile master or to Chutz La'aretz. That slave is going free. That's the rabbinic penalty. You're obligated to redeem him, and then you have to free him. Okay? Right? Important qualification. You have to go ahead and give him a get shichrer. Except when what? You wrote a shtar ono. What shtar ono? Where essentially he said to the Eved, I'm selling you, and if you run away, do not come back here. That is effectively ishtar shechur in and of itself. The Gemara just pointed out that it would appear that halacha l'maisa, in a case of collateralized avodim, if the lender went ahead and somehow laid claim to the Eved already, that may result in immediate emancipation as well, to be determined by the Rambam. Let's go. We'll say 44a, second line down from the top. Mem dalam lav. Tanra banon. Gavo b'chovo, o shelakho sikrikun lo yatsa lecherus. So it's a very interesting case. Let's say I borrowed money from a Gentile. And what happens? The Gentile took my slave as payment for his debt. Or sikrikun. We'll say sikrikun ultimately again is like is a thief, or we'll call it a thief. Rashi says over here is sikrikun. Sikrikon is b'shashe yisrael mufkarin lahariga v'amar ovid kochavim sa karkazu o eved zeh v'hinichani. So I'll say sikrikon represents someone who has like a lot of power over me to kill me, right? And he says, "Listen, I'm taking your eved. So I'll say, what's the halach in these kind of cases? Lo yatsa lecherus. The eved doesn't go free. So Gemara says, I don't understand. I understand case number 2. Why? Because in case number 2, the Eved is being taken forcibly from me. Right? I'm not giving over the Eved, is being taken from me. But in case number 1, what's the problem over here? Right? In case number 1, what's in case number 1, I will say, if he's being collected as a debt, I don't understand why he automatically goes free. I'm sorry, I understand. I don't. Let me take a step back. In case number 1, where he's being taken as payment for the debt, why would the Eved not go free in that case? Ubechovolo, or Minu, the Gemara says, Harisha Ansu Beis HaMelech Garno. So listen to this, we'll say a different kind of case. If, let's say again, the king took my produce against my will, in Bechovo, if he's taking it to satisfy a debt that I own, Chayev La'aser, then I'm obligated to separate out Trumas Maestros. Im Ba'an Poros, Patr La'aser. However, if he's just taking it because he's the king and he can take whatever he wants, then I'm not obligated to tithe. So we'll say what that sounds like is, if something is being seized from you in satisfaction of a debt that you owe, then normative halacha kicks in. So if that's the case, if someone seizes my Eved because I owe money, then the knas of the Mishnah should kick in and the Eved should be automatically emancipated. To which the Gemara says, "Shiny hasam to come a shashile." I will say it's different in the case. It's different in the case of meiser, because I will say when the king seizes my debt, my granary, my produce in satisfaction of a debt, I am benefiting from that because technically speaking, the amount that I would have had to separate out for Trumas and Maestros is now going to satisfy my debt. Tashma damarav hamocher avdu leparhanag oved kochavim yotza lecherus. So we say if a person goes ahead and sells his Eved to a parhanag. Now I say, what's a parhanag? Overcome Rashi is kasada lavod avodas hamelech azman ploni v'lashuv. So I'll say a parhanag is someone who extorts. Someone who extorts. So I'll say over here, I'm selling my Eved to an akum who is an extortionist. So what's the halacha? Yatsa lecherus. Ultimately, we'll say the Eved goes free. Now, why does the Eved go free? Hasam havile lefayis v'lo payis. Because I will say, here's the good thing about extortionists is you could go and appease them with something else. You should have given him a different piece of property, right? You chose to give him the Eved, so because you chose of your own volition to give him the Eved, ultimately, again, the Eved does not go free. So we'll say, I just want to point out what the Gemara seems to be highlighting over here, which is that it is only when you sell or give the Eved willingly that the knas, that the penalty of the Mishnah kicks in. But if the Eved is totally seized against your will, then the knas, the penalty, does not kick in. Says Gemara Gufa, Amarav, Hamocher Avdol Paranag Oved Kochavim. If a person goes ahead and sells his Eved to a Gentile extortionist, Yatza Lecherus, ultimately the Eved goes free. But what should I have done? The guy's an extortionist. You should have appeased him with a different piece of property, but because you didn't do so, ultimately, again, there is liability for that. Incredible. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, but say, what happens if I sold my Eved to an akum for 30 days? So this is an interesting case. So on one hand, I'm selling my Eved to an akum, but on the other hand, it's only for a limited amount of time. So does the penalty of the Mishnah kick in? So Tashma Da'amarav, Hamocher Avdol Paranag Ovid Kochavim, if a person goes ahead and sells his Eved to a Paranag Ovid Kochavim, ultimately again to a non-Jewish extortionist, Yatz Lecherus, Eved goes free, Hassam Beparanag Ovid Kochavim She'ena Chozeres. The reason over there is because once I sell it to the extortionist, then they'll say what? The Eved's not coming back. Everyone's not coming back. I will say, right, in this case, this situation is different. Why is the situation different? This is a timed sale, right? I'm only selling for 30 days. So what about the following case? Machro chutz mi malachto. So this is an interesting case. What happens if I sell my Eved to an Oved Kochavim, but with the exclusion of his work? In other words, so I say to Oved Kochavim, I'm selling him to you, but you can't work him. You can't work him, or you can't receive benefit from his labor. Right now, chutz min mitzvos. Or what happens if I go ahead and sell to Oved Kochavim and I say, Oved Kochavim, you can go ahead and I'm selling you my Eved Kanani, but he has to be able to perform mitzvos. Right? Chutz mi shabbos yamim tovim. I'm selling you my Eved Kanani, but ain't going to work on Saturday, right? He can't work on Shabbos, he can't work on Yom Tiv. Okay? Mahu. Leger Toshav, the Yisrael Mumar, Mahu. What happens if I sell my Eved Kanani to a Ger Toshav? Let's remember again, Ger Toshav is a non-Jew who lives in Eretz Yisrael, observes Shema Mitzvos B'nei Noah, and ultimately again sublimates his self to the system of halacha. Or Ali Yisrael Mumar. I will say, what happens to a Jew who's an apostate? Right? Mahu, Lekusi, Mahu. What about if I sell him to a Kusi? So I will say, so these are all non-classical cases of a sale. So what happens in all of these situations? The Gemara says, Pashut Miha, Chada. Out of all of these, I can answer at least one. Ger Toshav Harehu Ka'oved Kochavim. So I'll say, so one thing I know for sure, a Ger Toshav is an akum, which is actually very interesting, right? A Ger Toshav, I will say, is, remember again, so a Ger Toshav, who actually is not an akum, right? Remember again, akum is literally is an Oved Kochavim, Oved Kamazal, right? Someone who's worshiping idolatry. A Ger Toshav Dafka is not worshipping idolatry. Yet what the Gemara is saying is, for the purposes of this halacha, a Ger Toshav ultimately again is considered to be an akum. To which the Gemara says, Pashmi achada Ger Toshav harei ka'ovei kochavim. Kusi, the Yisrael mumar, amrei ka'ovei kochavim, amrei ki Yisrael. What about a kusi and a mumar? Ultimately, and I will say, so that's a machlokes. So I will say, so interestingly enough, what you see here is as follows. So we'll say, so number one, pretty much all of these questions that began from the time of a timed sale, what if I just sell them for 30 days? Or what if I just sell them with all of these exceptions? I'm selling my Avraham, but you can't work him. I'm selling my Oved Kochavim, but he's not going to work on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So do all of these cases trigger the knas or not? So the Gemara says, Teku. The only question the Gemara says that does resolve is selling him to a Ger Toshav is the equivalent of selling him to an akum. Incredible. So Evet Shipa Asma Lagayasos was an interesting case. What about an Eved who allowed himself to be captured? Eved who allowed himself to be captured. Ein Rabbi Yachal Lotzio Lo B'dini Yisrael Lo B'dini Avdecham. So we'll say, and now the master doesn't have the ability to extract him either using Jewish law or Gentile law. So again, we'll say step one is the Eved allow himself to be captured. Step two, the Jewish master, does not have any legal recourse by which to extract him from his captivity. Ma'u sheitel is damav. Is he allowed to go ahead and at least get payment for the Eved? So I will say, this is a very interesting case. Look what's happening over here. So right, I own an Eved Kanani. My Eved Kanani allows him to go ahead and get, right, my Eved Kanani allows himself to get captured by Gentile captors. I can't extract him. Not in our laws, not in secular law, I can't extract him. But captors aren't all bad. What are they willing to do? They're willing to pay me. They're willing to pay me. Right? Okay, boss, we all live with contradictions, right? They're willing to pay me. So now, what's the shaila? Can I accept the money? Now what's at play over here? What's at play over here is, well, if I accept the money, then what have I effectively done? What have I done? I've sold my Eved to a non-Jew, which is prohibited. On the other hand, I didn't sell my Eved to a non-Jew. My Eved was taken captive by a non-Jew, and I have no recourse through which or by which to extract my Eved. So I've already said there's a loss. Does the loss have to be a total loss that I can't accept any money? Or no, I didn't orchestrate this situation, and therefore, again, I should be able at least to be made whole by getting the money. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Puk aim mechiltecha. Suppose this is incredible. So this was the shaila posed in the base medrash. So Rabbi Yirmiyah said to Rabbi Zrika, Pok ayin b'mechiltech. Go ahead and examine your halachas. Right? In other words, review your learning and see if you can find an answer to this. Nafak dak va'ashkach. Sure enough, what happened? Rabbi Zrika so went ahead and reviewed his learning, and he found the following: Tisanya hamocher beisola ovekochavim dama of asurin. But say, if you sell your home in Eretz Yisrael to a non-Jew, any proceeds from that sale ultimately again are asur. So let's say if you look at Rashi says over mocher beisoli ovi kochavim be'eretz Yisrael da amar kra lo sichanim lo sitin lehem chaniya bekarka. So we'll say, so ultimately again this is talking about a situation. So again in Eretz Yisrael you're not allowed to sell property to a non-Jew. So if one went ahead and illegally sold his home to a non-Jew, the proceeds of the sale are asur. What happens if you have a non-Jew who forcibly extracted property from a Jew? And the Jew has no legal recourse, neither in Beis Din or secular court. Mutar litol as damav. You are allowed to go ahead and accept money for the sale. The kosef umale ba'arkaos shalahen. And also you could even go ahead and draft the sale document in their court, because it's as if you're saving it from your hand. In other words, we'll say, which is an expression that means the Jew is allowed to get money for this. Why? Because again, he didn't orchestrate or facilitate the sale. This was done against his will, and if he doesn't take the money, it's a complete loss. It's a complete loss, and like this, the Gentile walks away totally enriched. Number one, he got the property. Number two, he keeps the money. So I'll say, so what do you see from here? What do you see from here? You see from here that when there is an illegal transaction that is foisted upon you, right, that you do not orchestrate, you are allowed to accept money for the transaction. Now again, I will say, don't want to apply that to every case in halacha, because it doesn't, but again, in these type of situations where you have a prohibition to do something, someone did it against your will, it sounds like you're allowed to go ahead and receive payment for the transaction. To which the Gemara says, 1 second. V'dilma hani mili bayis ki dechevon de lo sagi le below bayis lo asi lezabune. So I'll say maybe it's only in the case of the home. Right? In the case of the home, where I'm not allowed to sell a home to an akum in Eretz Yisrael, now the akum took it, I'm allowed to take money. Why are both saying? We're not concerned that if we allow you to take the money, you're going to come to sell your home proactively. Why? Because a person needs a home, and they're not going to come to sell their home to an akum. I would say maybe by an eved, even though now the akum forcibly took the eved on his own. Perhaps we should be concerned that if we allow you to go ahead and what? If we allow you to go ahead and accept money, maybe you'll come to proactively sell the eved. Although, or maybe that's not a concern. Shalach lu Rabbi Ami. Amini Aybar Nasim. Torah Yotza L'chol Yisrael. Go ahead and disseminate this halacha to all of Klal Yisrael. Evet shehipil asma legayasos. If a slave allowed himself to be captured, vein Rabbi Yochel lo hotzio lo bedini Yisrael lo bedini ove kochavim, and the master doesn't have the ability to go ahead and what? And extract him, neither through Gentile law or halacha. Mutar litol as damav. You could accept money, the kosef umalav barkoshel oved kochavim, and draft the document in Gentile court, mipneshu kimatzal miyadam, because it's as if you're saving the money from the Gentiles' hands, i.e., you don't have to suffer an entire loss. So I will say, a very interesting case here. So it sounds like, so just two examples of this, where you have illegal transactions. I will say, I want to point out, the prohibition to sell a home in Eretz Yisrael to a non-Jew, according to Rashi's interpretation, is a biblical prohibition. So even though, again, that's a biblical prohibition versus selling your eved, which is a rabbinic prohibition, but we're lumping them together, because what we're seeing over here is that when an illegal transaction is visited upon you, it would appear that halacha l'maisa, because you did not orchestrate it, you are permitted to go ahead and accept payment for it. So if the akum seizes my home, I could accept payment for the home. The akum seizes my eved, and I will say the interesting part over here also is, remember, this is the eved allowing himself to be captured. The point over here is, I had no hand in this transaction. This was foisted upon me. In that kind of scenario, halacha l'maisa, one would be permitted to go ahead and accept money for the transaction. Incredible. Rabbi Shmuel Silber, hamocher avdol oved kochavim. If one sells his eved to an oved kochavim, konsin also admeh bedamav. So I'll say, listen to this. So I'll say, so now, remember, let's take a step back. So what did the Mishnah teach me? The Mishnah taught me that if I proactively sell my eved kinani, to a Gentile master to Chutz La'aretz, what am I obligated to do? I am obligated to go ahead and redeem him. See, we'll say, the lashon of the Mishnah is, he goes free. Right? Yatsa ben chorin. Rashi feels, what does it mean he goes free? What it means is, I am obligated to redeem him. And then after I'm obligated to redeem him, what do I have to do? What do I have to do? Shtar sheker, and I'm obligated to free him. Suppose I say, obviously, in order to redeem him, what do I have to do? I have to buy him back. So now I'll say, watch this. Now Rabbi Shmuel Levin says, by the way, you are obligated to buy him back for up to 100 times his value. So Rabbi says, so now this is incredible. Not only am I obligated to buy him back, not only am I obligated to free him upon repurchasing him, but I'm even obligated to buy him back. Rabbi Shmuel Silber says up to 100 times his value. To which the Gemara says, whoa, dafka olav. Now, what was I say? Is that maybe like a bit hyperbolic? Just saying I have to buy him back, and even if I have to buy him back at a loss, in other words, that I have to buy him back for more money than I originally sold him for, I'm obligated, or does 100 literally mean 100 times his value? So Tashma Damreish Lakish, Hamocher Behema Gasli Ove Kochavim. If a person goes ahead and sells a Behema Gasa, a large animal, ultimately again to an Oved Kochavim, right? And I will say now, right? Let's discuss this. Person sells a large animal to an Oved Kochavim, Konsin Osad Sarah Bedameha. You will penalize him that you have to buy back the animal up to 10 times its value. Now I will say, what's going on over here with Behema Gasa? So remember again, there is a rabbinic prohibition to sell large beasts of burden, Behema Gasa, to an akum. What are we concerned about? We're concerned that if you get used to selling large animals to Gentiles, you may come to what? Rent them to Gentiles as well. The concern over there is that the Gentile may then use the rented animal for work on Shabbos. And I will say, I have an obligation to ensure that not only do I not work on Shabbos, my animals are not permitted to work on Shabbos. If technically speaking, I have an animal rented out to the non-Jew, that is still my animal. If he works it on Shabbos, that is my problem. That's why you're not allowed to sell a behema gas, a large animal, to a non-Jew. What happens if you did? So konsin also adasar b'damav. You have to buy back the animal for up to 10 times its value. To which again the Gemara says, dafka or lav dafka. Literally 10 times or figuratively 10 times. So Tasha the Reish Lagish, Hamochar behema gas le'ovei kochavim. If a person sells large animal to ovei kochavim, konsin also ad mea bidameha. Whoa. If you say, so behema gas, you have to buy it back for up to 100 times its value. To which the Gemara says, shiny eved delo hadrale. So I will say, so it could very well be that halacha l'maisa, that it could very well be that by eved it's different. I'm sorry, did I skip? Yeah. So sorry. So Rabbi Shmuel Levin. I did skip. Yeah. So comes out with the Dilma. Okay. So that's what I'm saying. Hamochar behema gas le'ovei kochavim konsen also ad asara bidameha. So we'll say, so by behema gasa, I have to buy him back for up to 10 times its value, right? So the Gemara says, "V'dilma shiny eved." So we'll say, here's what's interesting. So by an eved, I have to buy him back for 100 times his value, up to 100 times his value. For behema gasa, up to 10 times his value. Why the disparity? To which the Gemara says, "V'dilma shiny eved dichol yoma v'yoma mafkele b'mitzvos." We'll say maybe an eved is different. Why? Because an eved, every single day that either he is owned by a non-Jew or every single day that he is outside of Eretz Yisrael, he is removed from the performance of mitzvos. Maybe because of that spiritual urgency, you have to buy him back no matter what, even up to 100 times his value. Others explain, Rabbi Shmuel Levin, Hamocher Avdol Ovei Kochavim, Konsin also Adasara Bidamav. Oh, okay, this is a little bit more digestible over here. Well, in alternate version, Rabbi Shmuel Levin says, if you sold your Eved, you have an obligation to buy him back, and you have to buy him back for up to 10 times his value. Dafka or lav dafka? We'll say literally 10 times or figuratively 10 times. So Tasha Damrei Shlakish, Hamochar behema gasa, Ovei kochavim, konsen also ad mea bidameha. Wow, but this is just the reverse, right? So Rabbi Shmuel Levin says, if you sell a behema gasa, you have to buy back the behema gasa for up to 100 times its value. To which the Gemara says, wow, what's the difference? Shiny eved de lo hadrule. Maybe I will say an eved is different because remember, when you buy back your behema gasa, at least what? You get to keep it. It's yours. Eved, when you buy back your eved, I will say, what happens when you buy back your eved? He's automatically emancipated. Maybe that's why you only have to buy him back up to 10 times his value. Ella, behema taima mai, mishum dahadrele. Liknisei tfeichad. So I'll say, if that's the case, so I'll say, so I don't understand. If halacha l'maisa, the behema comes back, so we'll say, so fine. So if you have to buy back the eved for up to 10 times his value, buy back the behema for up to 11 times his value. We'll say, how do you go from 10 to 100? from 10 to 100. Ella, Eved Milsa de lo Shchicha, or Milsa lo Shchicha lo Gazir Birabanan. Shabbos is actually very interesting. The Gemara says that people selling avodim to an akum, that is an uncommon occurrence. That's an uncommon occurrence. I will say, so because it's an uncommon occurrence, Chazal weren't really gozer. Because they weren't really gozer, therefore, again, if you do it, you only have to buy him back up to 10 times his value. The selling of a behema gasra, I'll say, on the other hand, could be a very common occurrence. How do Chazal ensure that you don't do it? By penalizing you what? Up to 100 times its value. So I will say, it appears from the conclusion of this Gemara, again, if we have just going to see in the Rambam, that Allah says, so now what I know is, not only do I have an obligation to buy back the Eved if I sell them to a Gentile master, but what? I even have to buy him back up to 10 times his value. So also you see that clearly Chazal trying to disincentivize someone selling their Eved to an Akum or outside of Chazal, because we'll say, number one, you have to buy him back. Number two, you have to buy him back up to 10 times his value. Number three, when you buy him back, what do you have to do? You have to free him. You have to emancipate him. So this is a huge potential loss. Binyamin Machar Avda Umes. What's an interesting case? What happens if Ruvain went ahead and sold his Eved and now he died? So I'll say, so Ruvain did something illegal. Ruvain sold his Eved Kanani to a non-Jewish master, and now Ruvain died. Ma'u says Beno Acharav. So we'll say, now Ruvain leaves behind the son. Does the son have an obligation to redeem the slave or not? And I will say, especially if we go with the idea that you have to redeem the slave up to 10 times its value, does the son have the obligation to do this or not? Imtim Salomar, Saram Ozen, Bechar, Umeis, Knasa Beno, Acharav. So let's listen to this. There's a concept called Bechar Behema. So we'll say, what's Talacha? So you have to give your firstborn animal to the Kohen. What does the Kohen do with the animal? Halacha l'maisa, if he goes ahead, if the animal is unblemished, it gets offered up as a carbon, and the Kohen gets to eat the meat. If the carbon is if the animal is blemished, then the Kohen gets to keep it himself. So I will say, so here's an interesting case. The halacha is, what happens if the Kohen purposely blemishes the animal himself? Kohen is a smart guy. He says, you know what, I don't want to give it as a carbon, I want to keep it. See, purposely, he cuts the ear. He purposely blemishes the animal. That's what it's called. So the Gemara says, there's a knas, there's a penalty there. So I'll say, so what happens if the Kohen blemished the Bechar, and then the Kohen died? So I will say, the son is penalized, right? The son has to carry out the penalty of the father. Maybe it's different in that case over there. Why? Mishum di isura da'araisahu. Because we'll say the father violated isura da'araisa. Aval hachi isura da'rabanan. But here, the prohibition to sell an Eved is an isura da'rabanan. Amud beis. Vimtim salomar kivein malach. So we'll say, see here the shaila. The shaila over here is Ruvain, the father, illegally sold his Eved Kanani to a Gentile master. Now Ruvain died. Ruvain has a son. So now, does the son have an obligation to go ahead and redeem the Eved Kanani, even for, let's say, 10 times its value, or not? So I'll say, so now we're trying to figure this out. So it's another very interesting case. But I'll say the halacha is as follows. On Chalamayid, you're not allowed to do malacha. Can't do work. The only type of work that you're allowed to do, for our purposes, the type of work you're allowed to do is what we call davar avad. Bless you. Something is going to be lost, right? In other words, if you don't do something, you're going to suffer a loss. You can do that on Chalamayid. So I'll say, the one thing you can't do is, what happens if somebody purposely timed their work so that it will become a davar ha'avad, something that is lost in Chalamayid? I was going to give you a good example of this. The classic example of this is flax. Right? The halacha is you have to soak flax for a certain amount of time. Right? If you allow it to soak for too long, so what happens? It's lost. It's lost. So let's imagine the following situation. Let's say the flax has to soak for a day or 2 days. Someone purposely put in their flax on Erev Yantiv. Right? So it's going to soak for Erev Yantiv, it's going to soak for the first day Yantiv, and then the first day Chalamayid, you're going to remove your flax. So now what have you done? You've purposely created a davar ha'avad scenario, right? You've purposely created it. So I'll say that's called kivein malachta b'moed umeis. And now I'll say, now what happens? So let's say, imagine Ruvain purposely put his flax in the water on Erev Yantiv, and now he died, lo kansu b'no acharav. So ultimately, we'll say we don't penalize the son. We allow the son to remove the flax. Why? Mishum d'lo avadi surah. Because again, the son didn't do anything, right? The son wasn't involved. Hacha mai. So we'll say in the case where Ruvain sold the Eved and then died. So do we say the knas is on Ruvain, but Ruvain is dead? Ol dilma lemamone kansra banabaha isay. We'll say here this fascinating shayla. We'll say here's what we know, right? What does the Mishnah teach us? If a person sells his Eved to a Gentile master or to Chutz La'aretz, what's the halacha? There's a knas. There's a penalty on the man, right? There's a penalty. What's the penalty? What's the penalty? You have to buy back the Eved for up to 10 times his value and then emancipate him. So here's the Gemara Shaila. Is the knas on the gavra, on the owner, on Ruvain, or is it on the chefza? Is it on the object? So I will say, what's the practical difference? Our case. Ruvain died. So if you say that the knas is on the gavra, on Ruvain, on the person, Ruvain's dead, and therefore again his son will have no obligation to go ahead and redeem this Eved. Or is the knas on the property, is the knas on the chefz, on the object, in this case the Eved Kanani, in which case again the object is still very much in existence, and maybe Ruvain the son will have an obligation to go ahead and redeem the Eved. So I'm like Tanisha, we learn this. What says in this case? Sada shnes kavtza b'shvius tezu l'matziches. So we'll say if you have a field, this is shmita. So we'll say in this case over here, you have a field. You cleared the field of thorns during the shmita year. So we'll say so. Ideally, this is not good, but midoraisa, this is not called work in the field. Right? Clearing from thorns is not called work in the field. Therefore, tezu l'matziches. You're allowed to go ahead and work the field on Matzah Shvius right after the Shemitah year. I'm sorry. Netaiva, o Nedaira, lo tiz Matzah Shvius. I'm saying here's an interesting case. What if you fertilize the field? So apparently, there are two different ways that you could fertilize a field. Netaiva, Rabbi means that literally, I brought fertilizer to the field, and I spread fertilizer out on the field. The other mechanism for fertilizing, I will say, is called penning, right? What does that mean? I take animals and I pen them on different parts of the field. So I will say the field becomes naturally fertilized through the waste of the animals. Either way, if I fertilize the field during Shemitah, lo tizun matzah shvius. We will say there is a penalty upon me, and I cannot plant that field after Shemitah. Naktinon hetiva umeis. So what about the following scenario? What happens if halacha l'maisa, Ruvain fertilized the field, right? Fertilized the field during Shemitah, illegal, and then he died. So what's the halacha? Bino zora. His son has the ability to plant that field after Shemitah. What do you see from here? Amma l'didei kansrabana l'brei kansrabana. I will say, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, the knas is on the individual and not on the chefz. It's on the gavra, not the chefz. On the individual, not on the object. So once Ruvain dies, halacha l'maisa, the knas dies along with him. Incredible. So therefore, again, what that seems to mean for us is that if Ruvain illegally sold his Eved Kanani, and then what? And then Ruvain died, Ruvain's son does not have an obligation to go ahead and redeem the Eved. So this is an interesting case. Okay, let's say Ruvain went ahead and was metame the taros of his friend. So I'll give you the following scenario. Imagine Ruvain has a falling out with Aaron. Right? Aaron's a Kohen. So what does Ruvain do? He says, I'm going to get this guy. He throws a sheretz into Ruvain's truma. Takes a dead mouse, throws it into Ruvain's truma. So what's the halacha? Now Ruvain dies, umeis, lo kansu rabbanan beno acharav. Now obviously by doing that, what did Ruvain do? Ruvain caused Aaron a loss. Now all of the truma is no good. Now interestingly enough, what's unique about this case, is this is called in halacha, hezek she'eno nikar, unrecognizable damage. Now, if you were to look at that truma after the sheretz was thrown into it, assuming the sheretz was removed, right? Is there any recognizable damage to the truma? No. This is called unrecognizable damage. Shabbos say, now listen to this. So lo kans rabbanan b'no acharav. Now Ruvain dies. Ruvain's son bears no culpability for the damage caused by his father. Says in my time, what's the reason for this? Hezek sheinonikar lo shmei hezek. Ultimately, again, unrecognizable damage is not called damage. It's not called damage. To which the Gemara says, so I'll say, so now remember, so if hezek sheinonikar is not called hezek, right? If unrecognizable damage is not called damage, then halacha l'maisa, why does Ruvain himself have to pay? To which the Gemara says, Knasa d'Rabbanani, l'didei kansu Rabbanan, l'brei lo kansu Rabbanan. Chazal only visited a knas. So what you begin to see over here is something very interesting. That whenever there is a rabbinic knas, rabbinic penalty, the rabbinic penalty only is vested or only is visited upon the perpetrator himself. But ultimately, again, the rabbinic penalty is not passed down generationally. So therefore, Rabbi say, same way by Truma, and it would appear, therefore, the Gemara's conclusion by the Eved case is, if Ruvain illegally sold his Eved to a Gentile master, to Chutz La'aretz, and then Ruvain died, that knas, the rabbinic penalty, is not passed down to the son. So rabbinic penalties go on the individual, not on the object. Therefore, once the perpetrator dies, no one else has liability for that rabbinic penalty, for that knas. Incredible. Olu Chutz La'aretz. So what happens now? We're speaking about selling the Eved to a Gentile master. What happens if you sold the Eved to Chutz La'aretz? So also there's a knas. You have to redeem the Eved and then emancipate him. Says the Torah, Hamocher Avdol Chutz La'aretz, that's the Cherus. Get shikrar me rabo sheni. Interesting, I will say. If you went ahead and you sold your Eved to Chutz La'aretz, and there was an Apache, the time over here is the following case. Ruvain lives in Eretz Yisrael. He sold his Eved to Shimon, who lives in Chutz La'aretz. Right? So now I will say, what happens? So ultimately, again, now the Eved goes free, and he needs to get shikrar, a document of emancipation. Who does he need to get shikrar from? Now the Gemara says, from the second master, from Shimon. Shimon Miel Omer, Pamim Yatsa, Pamim Lo Yatsa. Sometimes the Eved goes free, sometimes it doesn't go free. Ketzad, Omer Ploni Avdi Mechartiu Le Ploni Antuchi Lo Yatsa. So let's listen to this. If Ruvain says, Ploni my Eved, I sold him to so-and-so Antuchi, who is from Antuchia, right, which is a place outside of Eretz Yisrael. Shabbos says, so ultimately, again, so Lemaisa, what the Gemara is saying is like this, is if Ruvain sells his Eved, he knows that the buyer is from Chutz La'aretz, but he assumes that the buyer lives in Eretz Yisrael, right? Then ultimately, again, there is no penalty in that case. Lo yatsa. L'antuchi sheba antuchia yatsa. But if Ruvain sells his Eved to Shimon, who is from Antuchi and lives in Antuchia, i.e. he knows full well that Shimon lives in Chutz La'aretz, then what? Then ultimately, again, halach l'maisa, the Eved goes free. By the time that we learned, L'antuchi yatsa, so we learned that if Ruvain sold to Shimon, who the Antuchi, he is yotze l'cherus, L'antuchi hashari belud lo yatsa, but if he sells it to Shimon, who is from Antuchia but lives in Lud, the Eved doesn't go free. Lo kashya had islay beisa be'eretz Yisrael, had islay ushbiza be'eretz Yisrael. So I will say this is fascinating. Gemara wants to make the following suggestion or the following distinction. If halacha l'maisa, Ruvain sells to Shimon, right? He knows that Shimon is from Chutz La'aretz. But I will say, but watch this. But Shimon has a home in Eretz Yisrael. Then I will say, Ruvain has every right to assume that Shimon is going to be remaining with his newly purchased Eved Kanani in Eretz Yisrael. If, however, Shimon doesn't have a home, what does Shimon do? He has a timeshare. So I'll say, a fixed Airbnb, right? He has a timeshare. So I will say, if he has a timeshare, that he cannot rely on the fact that he's going to live in Eretz Yisrael, and therefore the assumption is he has sold that Eved to live in Chutz La'aretz, and therefore the penalty will kick in. So we'll say, bye Rabbi. So we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up a minute with this last case. But I will say, so bottom line, I just want to point out what we emerge with. Number one is the knas. Right, knas of selling the Eved to Chutz La'aretz, or ultimately again to an akum, obligation to redeem seems to be even up to 10 times the value. Upon redemption, get shikrar, and Eved goes free. The knas does not pass down. So if the perpetrator dies, the knas dies along with him, and his son has no further obligation. Now we transition on both sides to selling an Eved to Chutz La'aretz. Once again, the Eved goes free. who has the obligation to go ahead and give the get shikhr? That Emir Hashem to be determined. I will say shkoyach.